I've read a lot about the fighter pilots of World War II, and the more you learn, the more you realize how different reality was from the way movies portray it. When people today hear the phrase, ejecting from a fighter aircraft, they imagine a modern jet, a single pull of a handle, a violent blast upward, and then a parachute calmly opening in the sky. But in World War II, that idea didn't exist for most pilots. There was no button, no rocket seat, no automated escape system. Getting out of a damaged fighter was a raw, physical fight for survival, often fought in seconds, with terror, confusion, and sheer luck deciding who lived and who didn't. If your aircraft was hit, the first thing you felt was not heroism, but shock. Smoke filled the cockpit. The engine might be screaming or completely dead. Oil splashed across the canopy. The plane could be rolling, diving, or spinning out of control. And in that moment, if you decided to bail out, you had to do everything yourself. You had to unstrap your harness. You had to jettison or shove back a thick, heavy canopy, sometimes already warped by heat or twisted by damage. And then you had to physically climb out of the cockpit of a moving aircraft into a hurricane of air. This was not easy. The survival rate depended on many factors, and speed was one of the most brutal. At slower speeds under roughly 170 miles per hour, a pilot had a fighting chance. Historians estimate that under these conditions, survival rates could reach around 70 to 75%, assuming the pilot wasn't injured and could deploy the parachute properly. But that number collapses the moment speed increased. At high speed, especially above 300 miles per hour, the air itself became an enemy. Pilots described it as hitting a solid wall. The wind pressure pinned them into their seats so violently that some couldn't even raise an arm, let alone climb out. Men were trapped in cockpits not because the aircraft was intact, but because physics wouldn't let them move. The faster the dive, the more impossible escape became. Many pilots died fully conscious, knowing what was happening, but physically unable to do anything about it. And even if you managed to get free of the cockpit, the danger was far from over. One of the most lethal moments came immediately after leaving the aircraft. Fighters were compact machines with tails positioned directly behind the pilot's exit path. The violent airflow often slammed the escaping pilot backward, straight into the tailplane or vertical stabilizer. Roughly 1 out of every 4 pilots who attempted to bail out were killed this way, not by fire or ground impact, but by striking their own aircraft. At those speeds, hitting the tail was like colliding with a steel beam. Then came the parachute. World War II parachutes were reliable for their time, but they were not perfect and they were not automatic. Pilots had to pull the ripcord themselves, sometimes while tumbling uncontrollably. If the aircraft was spinning, the pilot could be thrown into a wild rotation that made orientation nearly impossible. Some men passed out before they could deploy the chute. Others pulled too early and were dragged violently by the opening canopy. Some pulled too late. Altitude mattered just as much as speed. At low altitude, there simply wasn't time. Many air combats occurred below 10,000 feet and often much lower. A pilot who escaped at only a few thousand feet had seconds to stabilize and deploy the parachute. There was no margin for error. A slight delay meant death. This is why many pilots chose to stay with their aircraft longer than they should have, hoping to regain control or reach friendly territory. They knew that jumping too low was almost pointless. Fire added another layer of horror. Aircraft fuel tanks were vulnerable, and once a fighter caught fire, temperatures inside the cockpit rose rapidly. Pilots sometimes suffered severe burns before they could even attempt escape. Leather flight jackets and gloves offered little protection against flames. Some men tried to jump through fire. Others hesitated, knowing their parachutes could ignite the moment they opened. In some cases, the parachute was already burning or damaged before the pilot ever left the plane. One of the most famous survival stories from the war shows just how much luck played a role. British airman Nicholas Alcomode was flying aboard a bomber when it was attacked over Germany. The aircraft caught fire and his parachute was destroyed. Faced with the choice of burning alive or jumping without a parachute, he chose to jump. He fell from approximately 18,000 feet, tumbling through the night sky. By sheer chance, he landed in pine trees and deep snow, which absorbed the impact. He survived with relatively minor injuries. Stories like this are often told as miracles, and that's exactly what they were. For every Alcomode, there were thousands whose stories ended differently. Conditions on the ground also affected survival. A pilot who bailed out over friendly territory had a good chance of rescue and recovery. Over enemy territory, survival meant something different. Many pilots survived the jump only to be captured, wounded, or killed after landing. Some were attacked by civilians. Others were lynched. Some evaded capture for days or weeks. Survival in this sense did not always mean freedom. As the war progressed, aircraft became faster. This made bailouts even more dangerous. Late war fighters pushed speeds that made manual escape nearly impossible during high-speed dives. Engineers understood the problem, and by the final years of the war, Germany began experimenting with ejection seats, particularly for jet aircraft like the Messerschmitt, Me-262, and later designs. But these early ejection seats were crude and brutal. Instead of rockets, early German ejection seats used compressed air or explosive charges to blast the pilot out of the cockpit. The acceleration was violent. Many pilots suffered severe spinal injuries. Some had their backs snapped. Others were knocked unconscious instantly, which created new dangers if the parachute system failed. These systems saved lives, but they were far from safe by modern standards. They were desperate solutions to a desperate problem. Other nations observed these developments but did not field operational ejection seats before the war ended. Most Allied pilots still relied on manual bailouts until the conflict was over. It wasn't until the late 1940s and early 1950s that modern ejection seat technology became standard. So what was the overall survival rate? It's difficult to give a single number because it varied wildly depending on aircraft type, speed, altitude, location, and pilot condition. But historians generally estimate that during World War II, roughly 50% or fewer of pilots who attempted to bail out survived the entire process, from escape to landing. In some air forces and circumstances, the number was much lower. Compared to modern aviation, where ejection seat survival rates exceed 90%, the difference is staggering. What makes these stories so powerful is not just the danger, but the mindset of the men who flew. They climbed into fragile machines knowing that if something went wrong, there was no guaranteed escape. Every mission carried the possibility of fire, mechanical failure, or enemy attack, and bailing out was never a simple solution. It was a gamble stacked against them. When we watch old footage or hear veteran interviews, it's easy to focus on tactics, victories, and aircraft performance, but behind every bailout was a human being making a split-second decision under unimaginable stress. Some survived because they were skilled. Some survived because they were calm. And many survived or died simply because of timing and luck. World War II pilots didn't have eject buttons or safety guarantees. They had courage, training, and hope. And sometimes that was enough.